how do we know what we know about inequality? How do we know how incomes are distributed? A lot of it comes out of this project that Piketty and Emmanuel Saez at Berkeley have been pursuing. They've tracked top incomes. What share of the income generated in the economy is going to the top 10%, the top 1%, the top 0.1%, all of which follow pretty much the same pattern. And it looks like this. We're going back to World War I, and this is the top 10%, but the truth is it's going to be the same shape, although even more extreme if you look at the top 1% or the top 0.1%. So we have, an early on period where almost half of total income went to just 10% of the population. Then something happened. The drastic drop on the eve of World War II. We come out the other end of World War II, and we are a middle-class society. Wartime policies, the rise of unions have a whole lot to do with it, but it sticks. And so we have this long period, this long flat stretch of a pretty equal society. That's the America I grew up in. Then, takes off, starting in the late 70s. There's some wiggles, ups and downs, but more and more of the income gets concentrated in the hands of a few people. In many ways, our image of ourselves is still that we are this middle-class society where all of us are leading more or less the same lives, but that's not actually the way we live. We are a society in which lots of people are barely making it, and in which a few people are living on a scale, a level of lavishness that is actually hard for people to imagine, I think for most people to imagine. Income is what you earn in a given year, what you get. Your salary, maybe dividends on stocks you own, whatever. Wealth is the value of your assets. Historically, if we go back to the 19th century, people who had high incomes typically had high incomes because they had a lot of wealth. They owned stuff. They owned railroads. They owned big plots of land, whatever. In the 80s, 90s, we started to have people with very high incomes again, but it was mostly not because of what they owned. They were people who were making big incomes because they were financial wheeler-dealers, or because they were corporate CEOs being paid enormous compensation. But now, increasingly, we're also going back to the days when a lot of the people who have very high incomes have them because they own lots of assets, sometimes because they inherited it from people who made a lot of money as CEOs or as financial wheeler-dealers. So both are a problem for society, I would say. Huge inequality is a big problem for society. But if it's based upon wealth, it's even worse because the people who've inherited lots of wealth are in a position that people who don't inherit lots of wealth can't have very much hope of getting. If you read Piketty, I don't know if you, how many of you have actually read it. Actually, we do know, thanks to Kindle highlights, we know how much, not only how many people have bought the book, but how far in they read. And the answer is actually, on average, about 27 pages. But if you do read it, he talks a lot about rates of return. It matters a huge amount how much people earn on their assets. If the rate of return on assets is faster than the growth of the economy, then wealth can sort of feed on itself. People who have a large share of wealth can expand that wealth faster than the economy grows, which means that they own a larger and larger share of the economy's assets. And that has been true in some periods, not true in others. Part of what was going on during the post-war generation was that between relatively high rates of taxes on profits and very vigorous growth, the return on assets was actually less than the rate of growth of the economy. So wealth inequality was not self-perpetuating, was not self-reinforcing. But what Piketty pointed out is that actually we're increasingly starting to look again like the robber baron era, that we're getting back to where wealth, and in particular inherited wealth, is playing a big role. So we're full on back to the bad old days in terms of an unequal society in which what you have depends a lot on what you inherit.